So today, we're going to unpack a massive strategic shift. How Pakistan, a country that was, for a long time, totally obsessed with its land borders, was kind of forced to look out at the sea. And we're going to see how this great pivot went down, all through the eyes of one really fascinating article from way back in 1981. Yep, this is our source material for this whole deep dive. It's an article from the summer of '81 called Pakistan and the Indian Ocean. What's so cool about this is that by digging into just this one text, we get this incredible snapshot, a real window into how people were thinking while these huge changes were happening, like in real time. So let's see what it has to say. All right, so let's just start with a big question, the central puzzle here. You've got a nation, Pakistan, that was basically born into conflict, right? It's got hostile land borders on multiple sides. So why on earth would it completely ignore the sea for its first 20 years? I mean, it just seems like a huge strategic blind spot, doesn't it? And this slide, it perfectly sums up that kind of split-screen reality for Pakistan in its early days. On one side, you have the land. That's where all the action was, all the perceived threats. We're talking about India and Afghanistan. That was their entire focus. And on the other side, the ocean. That was just there. It was seen as a British lake, a calm, secure area totally dominated by a friendly power. The sea just wasn't a problem they needed to worry about. So let's dig into that a little more. This ocean blind spot. For almost a quarter century, Pakistan's whole strategic map just stopped at the coastline. You see, this land-focused thinking wasn't just a choice. It was basically baked into the country's DNA from the start. The threats from India and Afghanistan, they felt immediate, existential. And the military itself was a direct legacy of the British Indian Army, which was all about land power. The Navy was always the junior partner. And just look at the history. All three wars they fought up to 1965 were on land. As long as the British Royal Navy was out there patrolling the seas, why would they ever think they needed anything different? And this right here is the key. You have to remember, for 150 years, that's an incredibly long time. The Indian Ocean was, for all intents and purposes, a British lake. That long period of stability created this deep-seated sense of security. It basically allowed countries like Pakistan to turn their backs to the sea and focus all their energy inward on their own chaotic land borders. But well, that long, quiet era of stability was about to come to a crashing halt. And I mean fast. The entire worldview we just talked about, it got completely shattered by a series of rapid-fire shocks in the late 60s and early 70s. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's like one time after another. First, in the 60s, Britain makes the huge announcement that it's pulling its military out from east of Suez. Boom, massive power vacuum opens up overnight. Almost immediately, who rushes in? The US and the Soviet Union. At the very same time, India kicks off this huge naval expansion and modernization program. And then, the final straw, the 1971 war. That's when Pakistan's weakness at sea was just brutally exposed for everyone to see. And we're not talking about a subtle change here. The superpowers moved in, and they moved in big. The US brings its massive 7th Fleet into the ocean and starts building a major base at Diego Garcia. The Soviets, they send their first warships in 1966, and by 1970, just 4 years later, 150 of their ships had already visited ports all over the region. The British lake was officially a thing of the past. But hold on, it wasn't just the global superpowers filling that void. A regional power, India, saw its chance and had its own big ambitions. And, as our source points out, India's goal was crystal clear: to become the #1 naval force among all the coastal states in the Indian Ocean. For Pakistan, well, this was a direct challenge, happening right on its doorstep. And this is where all that theory became a really devastating reality. The 1971 Indo-Pakistan War was the absolute undeniable wake-up call. The Indian Navy successfully blockaded what was then East Pakistan, and it was just a catastrophic failure for Pakistan. It inflicted massive losses and proved, beyond any doubt, that the threat from the sea was no longer some abstract idea. It was real, and it was here. Okay, so faced with this brand new and, frankly, terrifying reality, Pakistan had to do something. They had no choice but to respond. And so they began to forge an entirely new strategic doctrine, one that was finally focused on the ocean. And you can see this profound shift in thinking perfectly in this quote from Pakistan's Prime Minister back in 1976. Listen to this. He says, "The mastery of the Indian Ocean is going to become the most important problem in the future. That is more important than some of the territorial problems." Wow. I mean, that is a complete 180-degree turn from their old land-first mentality.
So, on the diplomatic front, Pakistan started pushing this new idea, the Indian Ocean Peace Zone. The whole concept was to try and make the region free from all that superpower rivalry, creating a space where smaller nations wouldn't get caught in the middle or, bullied by a bigger regional power.
And this new doctrine really rested on a few key pillars. First, get the superpower military presence down to a bare minimum. Second, stop any single regional state, and they were clearly thinking about India here, from becoming the dominant power. Third, especially after India tested a nuclear device in '74, they wanted to push for a nuclear weapons-free zone in South Asia. And finally, the broader goals: settle disputes peacefully and respect everyone's sovereignty. But this big pivot wasn't just about warships and security. It was about money, too. It was economic. Pakistan jumped on this new international trend of declaring a 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and that gave them the sole rights to all the resources in that massive patch of ocean off their coast. And you can see the results right here. This wasn't just theory. It had a real economic impact. Take fishery exports, for example, a key part of that new economic zone. They more than quadrupled in just 7 years. We're talking about a jump from around 111 million rupees to over 461 million. That's serious money. Of course, to make any of this happen, they needed real military reforms to back it up. So first, they created a Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee to get everyone, Army, Navy, Air Force, on the same page. Second, they literally moved the naval headquarters to the capital, Islamabad, to make sure it was at the center of decision-making. And, this is a big one, in 1972, the Navy finally got its own air wing, which hugely expanded what it could do on its own. But just as Pakistan was making this huge strategic pivot, the ground beneath them shifted again. Right as the 1970s were closing out, the entire region was rocked by 2 more giant geopolitical earthquakes, making the future of the ocean look anything but peaceful. And these were the famous twin jolts of 1979. In one corner, you have the Iranian Revolution, which toppled a key ally of the West and threw the whole Persian Gulf into chaos. And in the other corner, at the exact same time, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. This brought a superpower's army right up to Pakistan's border and that much closer to the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. And the American reaction? It was swift and it was blunt. President Carter issued what we now call the Carter Doctrine. And it basically said, an attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be repelled by use of any means necessary, including military force. I mean, he was drawing a line in the sand. And this pretty much guaranteed more superpower confrontation right there in Pakistan's backyard. And that brings us right back to the central question that was just hanging in the air when this article was written back in 1981. With global superpowers literally drawing lines in the sand, and with regional ambitions totally unchecked, could that dream of a tranquil ocean, the whole point of Pakistan's new strategy, could it even survive? It's a question that, when you look back from today, perfectly captures just how volatile and important this part of the world has always been.